Slid, if these be your passados and montantes, I'll have none of them. Ned Knowles. The Baron Ritzner von Jung was of a noble Hungarian family, every member of which, at least as far back into antiquity as any certain records extend, was more or less remarkable for talent of some description, the majority of that species of grotesquerie in conception of which Tieck, a scion of the house, has given vivid, although by no means the most vivid, exemplification. My acquaintance with Ritzner commenced at the magnificent Chateau Young, into which a train of droll adventures not to be made public threw me during the summer months of the year 18 . Here it was that I obtained a place in his regard, and here, with somewhat more difficulty, a partial insight into his mental conformation. In later days, this insight grew more clear, as the intimacy which had at first permitted it became more close, and when, after 3 years' separation, we met at G-N, I knew all that it was necessary to know of the character of Baron Ritzner von Jung. I remember the buzz of curiosity which his advent excited within the college precincts on the night of the 25th of June. I remember still more distinctly that while he was pronounced by all parties at first sight the most remarkable man in the world, no person made any attempt at accounting for his opinion. That he was unique appeared so undeniable that it was deemed impertinent to inquire wherein the uniquity consisted. But letting this matter pass for the present, I will merely observe that from the first moment of his setting foot within the limits of the university, he began to exercise over the habits, manners, persons, purses, and propensities of the whole community which surrounded him an influence the most extensive and despotic, yet at the same time the most indefinite and altogether unaccountable. Thus the brief period of his residence at the university forms an era in its annals, and is characterized by all classes of people appearing to it or its dependencies as that very extraordinary epoch forming the domination of the Baron Ritzner von Jung. Upon his advent to G-N, he sought me out in my apartments. He was then of no particular age, by which I mean that it was impossible to form a guess respecting his age by any data personally afforded. He might have been 15 or 50, and was 21 years and 7 months. He was by no means a handsome man, perhaps the reverse. The contour of his face was somewhat angular and harsh. His forehead was lofty and very fair, his nose a snub, his eyes large, heavy, glassy, and meaningless. About the mouth there was more to be observed. The lips were gently protruded, and rested the one upon the other, after such fashion that it is impossible to conceive any, even the most complex combination of features conveying so entirely and so singly the idea of unmitigated gravity, solemnity, and repose. It will be perceived, no doubt, from what I have already said, that the Baron was one of those human anomalies now and then to be found who make the science of mystification the study and the business of their lives. For this science a peculiar turn of mind gave him instinctively the cue, while his physical appearance afforded him unusual facilities for carrying his projects into effect. I firmly believe that no student at G-N during that renowned epoch so quaintly termed the domination of the Baron Ritzner von Jung ever rightly entered into the mystery which overshadowed his character. I truly think that no person at the university, with the exception of myself, ever suspected him to be capable of a joke, verbal or practical. The old bulldog at the garden gate would sooner have been accused, the ghost of Heraclitus, or the wig of the emeritus professor of theology. This, too, when it was evident that the most egregious and unpardonable of all conceivable tricks, whimsicalities, and buffooneries were brought about, if not directly by him, at least plainly through his intermediate agency or connivance. The beauty, if I may so call it, of his art mystique lay in that consummate ability resulting from an almost intuitive knowledge of human nature and a most wonderful self-possession, by means of which he never failed to make it appear that the drolleries he was occupied in bringing to a point arose partly in spite and partly in consequence of the laudable efforts he was making for their prevention and for the preservation of the good order and dignity of Alma Mater. The deep, the poignant, the overwhelming mortification which upon each such failure of his praiseworthy endeavors would suffuse every lineament of his countenance left not the slightest room for doubt of his sincerity in the bosoms of even his most sceptical companions. The adroitness, too, was no less worthy of observation, by which he contrived to shift the sense of the grotesque from the creator to the created, from his own person to the absurdities to which he had given rise. In no instance before that of which I speak have I known the habitual mystific escape the natural have I known the habitual mystific to in no instance before that of which I speak have I known the habitual mystific escape the natural consequence of his maneuvers, an attachment of the ludicrous to his own character and person. Continually developed in an atmosphere of whim, my friend appeared to live only for the severities of society, and not even his own household have for a moment associated other ideas than those of the rigid and august with the memory of the Baron Ritzner von Jung. During the epoch of his residence at G-N, it really appeared that the demon of the dolce far niente lay like an incubus upon the university. Nothing, at least, was done beyond eating and drinking and making merry. The apartments of the students were converted into so many pot-houses, and there was no pot-house of them all more famous or more frequented than that of the Baron. Our carousals here were many, and boisterous, and long, and never unfruitful of events. Upon one occasion, we had protracted our sitting until nearly daybreak, and an unusual quantity of wine had been drunk. The company consisted of 7 or 8 individuals besides the Baron and myself. Most of these were young men of wealth, of high connection, of great family pride, and all alive with an exaggerated sense of honor. They abounded in the most ultra-German opinions respecting the duello. To these quixotic notions, some recent Parisian publications, backed by 3 or 4 desperate and fatal rencounters at G-N, had given new vigor and impulse, and thus the conversation during the greater part of the night had run wild upon the all-engrossing topic of the times. The Baron, who had been unusually silent and abstracted in the earlier portion of the evening, at length seemed to be aroused from his apathy, took a leading part in the discourse, and dwelt upon the benefits, and more especially upon the beauties, of the received code of etiquette in passages of arms with an ardor, an eloquence, an impressiveness, and an affectionateness of manner which elicited the warmest enthusiasm from his hearers in general, and absolutely staggered even myself, who well knew him to be at heart a ridiculer of those very points for which he contended, and especially to hold the entire fanfaronade of dueling etiquette in the sovereign contempt which it deserves. Looking around me during a pause in the Baron's discourse, of which my readers may gather some faint idea when I say that it bore resemblance to the fervid, chanting, monotonous yet musical sermonic manner of Coleridge, I perceived symptoms of even more than the general interest in the countenance of one of the party. The gentleman whom I shall call Hermann was an original in every respect, except perhaps in the single particular that he was a very great fool. He contrived to bear, however, among a particular set at the university a reputation for deep metaphysical thinking, and I believe for some logical talent. As a duelist he had acquired a great renown, even at G-N. I forget the precise number of victims who had fallen at his hands, but they were many. He was a man of courage, undoubtedly, but it was upon his minute acquaintance with the etiquette of the duello that the nicety of his sense of honor that he most especially, and the nicety of his sense of honor, that he most especially prided himself. These things were a hobby which he rode to the death. To Ritzner, ever upon the lookout for the grotesque, his peculiarities had for a long time past afforded food for mystification. Of this, however, I was not aware, although in the present instance I saw clearly that something of a whimsical nature was upon the tapis with my friend, and that Hermann was its especial object. As the former proceeded in his discourse, or rather monologue, I perceived the excitement of the latter momently increasing. At length he spoke, offering some objection to a point insisted upon by R, and giving his reasons in detail. To these the Baron replied at length, still maintaining his exaggerated tone of sentiment, and concluding, in what I thought very bad taste, with a sarcasm and a sneer. The hobby of Hermann now took the bit in his teeth. This I could discern by the studied, hair-splitting farrago of his rejoinder. His last words I distinctly remember. Your opinions, allow me to say, Baron von Jung, although in the main correct, are in many nice points discreditable to yourself and to the university of which you are a member. In a few respects they are even unworthy of serious refutation. I would say more than this, sir, were it not for the fear of giving you offense. Here the speaker smiled blandly. I would say, sir, that your opinions are not the opinions to be expected from a gentleman.